So tell me, are you ready at Imba version 2?
Yeah, we're hoping to get there. So we should definitely just move quickly to version 2 now, like version 2 final. And as Abdella has talked about internally here, it's no problem to just release kind of rapidly 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, whatever.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's much better than staying at the whole alpha thing, because that feels very unstable. It obviously is unstable as well, but at the same time, it just feels, yeah, I think we should go for 2.0.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the big features was like changes was the bundler overhaul. Can you? Yeah. I think we can start with that, because I think that's one of the biggest changes recently in Imba.
Yeah.
And people like wonder like, what does it mean? Like what changed?
Yeah.
What is?
So I guess I haven't had that much time to prepare. So since the last meeting, since it's been so long, I guess there are many other notable changes as well. But the most recent one, which is nice to talk about, is the bundler stuff, like the bundler rewrite. Initially, we had a problem where we were stuck on an old version of ES build, like 0.9.7, I think. And because we were stuck on that version, there were a lot of things we couldn't do. A lot of like things that were just simply, someone is joining now. Hey. So yeah, so we struggled for a long time wanting to update to the latest ES build, and Abdella submitted a bug report and a pull request for an issue that actually was a showstopper for us in ES build. Eventually, we never got a response from Evan, so we ended up bypassing it with sort of a hack that does work. So now we are finally on the latest version of ES build, and I think we'll be able to continue staying on the latest versions for quite a long time. And one of the biggest benefits of moving to the latest versions was that ES build finally exposes their own file resolver mechanism, like their internal resolve method, so that we can remove a ton of file system resolve hacky stuff in the bundler and just rely on ES build for that part. And at the same time, we just removed a ton of the whole our own hashing and dependency resolution for all the files that you build. So the effect is that the bundler is now much smaller, like our code. It's much less code on our side, and we're relying much more on ES build directly. And we also now support finally for path aliases and stuff. We now support, if you define aliases in a TS config or a JS config, just with any other project, it actually works with the Imba files in the bundler. At the same time, I tried to clean up some of the configuration, the options for the Imba binary and the Imba build command. Not completely successfully, I would say. There are a few more things we need to fix and old functionality that we need to add back in. But since we now rely much more on ES build, it is less prone for weird errors, and it's just generally more robust, I think. So I guess I can share my screen and try. There are a few nice results from this. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
This is a tiny project, just a tiny template. Source mapping is working much better now. So if I have an indexed HTML file here at the root of the project. If I just do Imba index HTML, -w is for watching, like it's going to continually rebuild. The Imba binary is creating a tiny server that serves this index HTML, and it also builds the JavaScript and styles necessary that it discovers in the HTML and nested inside of that. And it also builds these source map files. So if I move to the server that it's spun up for me now, this is a tiny application. It's from the Vite Svelte Vite template, just as an example. And if you now go to any of the styles here, any of the elements, you will see that this is a good demo effect. Yeah, it works. So you can see that it's actually source mapping the styles themselves. So you can see here, so that selector, even if the selector looks a bit cryptic, it is in the main.imba file. And even theoretically, if you would like to change things inside of Chrome, the developer tools, that should work. So now I can't edit this. And the reason is that this file doesn't really exist. So if you see here that it has discovered this file, according to the source mapping, the file resides in this directory in a local folder structure on my hard disk. So what you need to do then to actually be able to edit and to link the files with your real file system is that if you have a project that you're developing locally, you can go to file system and just add folder to workspace. And if you add that folder to the workspace, then Chrome developer tools will automatically discover the links between the files according to the source mapping and the files in your workspace. So if I now go here and you see that there's a green dot here, that means that it has kind of found the file that the source map represents. So if I go into that file now and I change something here, I can actually do it, and I click save. I actually edit the real file from the web developer tools. And as you can see, it watches the file since I'm running the Imba command, and it reloads. So if I go to the same file here, like main, isn't it this? You'll see that it's changed here as well. So that's pretty nice. It's not like I'm not doing a lot of development from the web developer tools, but it is actually quite nice, especially to be able to see the CSS stuff, because previously, even if there's still a long way to go with real per selector source mapping, it's much better than nothing. Whereas previously I had, for larger projects, I would have like 100 selectors there, and all of them were just mapped to app.css, and you had no idea where they were actually defined. So that's one of the nice automatic results from the new bundling. Another thing is that previously we did a lot of tricky things when you build something. I'm not sure how this works. If I just build the index.html now, all it will do is it will create just the index.html in the dist folder and the relevant assets. But it will no longer build, it won't build a server to come along with it. Like I'm considering going back on that, but right now it's when you do Imba build and do it with a client-side entry point, it's only going to give you the client-side stuff and not any of the server stuff. But also, if I had a server here, or if I just had a server script, let's say I just add server.imba log 1, 2, 3. If I just do build C server, since it's not really serving anything, it's also going to be a very simple file. And previously we wrapped everything in an Imba loader file where we actually hacked into the module system in Node to be able to do source mapping and all sorts of weird things. And that's now gone, which is good. So you can essentially, if you have a server, if I had even an Express app here that uses Imba serve and other things, calling Imba build and that entry point will end up giving you a single file that can be run in vanilla Node anywhere without thinking about the dependencies, which is a kind of nice, a nice feature here. But yeah, at the same time, I talked to Abdella about, he has been talking for a while about doing a Vite plugin for Imba. I have been like positive because it's a good thing to have for beginners. I see now also that the Vite ecosystem is huge, and there are so many standards sort of that Vite has. Vite is the new standard now, so by supporting Vite fully, then if you're building client-side only applications, that will probably be the obvious way to run or build your Imba projects going forward. But if you are doing more complex things where you actually have a full server side that seamlessly connects to a client side, and you share styles and you share components across them, I still think running things through the Imba binary is better. But it remains to be seen what can be done with the SSR stuff on Vite as well. Do you have any input there, Abdullah?
Yeah, about Vite plugins. I've been excited about it. So I've been thinking about it for a long time, but now I took a shot. It didn't take so much time, but it's working very nice. So you can, I can show you. So we didn't publish it yet, but let me share my screen. Can you enable screen sharing, Sindre?
Definitely. I thought
it is enabled.
That's for all participants.
Yep, it's enabled. So share. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, where am I? Yep. So this is the Imba repository. There's a test project here. Yeah, I'm gonna just try to launch it. A bit plugin. Gonna install dependencies and then okay. Okay, and link. Okay, it's working. I'm gonna move the browser to this screen. Okay. I think I need to share the whole screen. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Share screen. Desktop 1, share. Yep. Can you see the browser now?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So this is this is a little app. It's quite similar to what Sindre showed us recently. Okay, here's the code. So I'm gonna go through the start. As you see, there's an index HTML here, and it points to this main.js file. And this main.js file just imports, styles, and imports the Imba file. This is gonna be removed in some next release. So right now, it's not supported to have a main.imba file here, but I'm gonna fix that next. Anyway, so here is the Imba app, and it works nicely. One of the things I added this morning is support for SVG. So as you see, you can already use an image tag with an SRC that points to an SVG, but it's not very cool. So it's better to use the SVG tag with an SRC that uses the logo import.
Yeah.
This treats it as a tag, so you can have your inline styles here that are going to be applied, and that's very cool. It's one of the features that I ported from the Imba bundler, and it's not included by default in the Vite plugin. It works very nice, and probably you already know about Vite, but you can check out the website. We have lots of features for free. One of them is not supported even in Imba, which is the import.meta.glob. To import, if you have 100 images in a folder, like you can import them all using this import.meta.glob. and this wasn't supported in Imba, but it's supported now because because we use Vite. So it's a nice addition, and we can rely on Vite for lots of things now.
Yeah, I think it probably opens up for a lot of it's going to be much easier, I guess, to deploy things to different platforms, to connect to other like non-Imba backends and stuff, because Vite has already done it and has conventions for doing that. So you have tons of Vite plugins doing all sorts of things. And the import meta glob is a perfect example, because that is just it has been on the roadmap for a long time. I haven't had time to start to tackle it, but this works perfectly out of the box with Vite, and I think it's pretty advanced as well. And also the way Vite actually builds for production is arguably a lot better than the way ESBuild does it right now, because it uses rollup, which has much better control of how they chunk modules. So one challenge currently that we also experience on Scrimba is that the only way to, when you use code splitting with ESBuild and you have multiple entry points and lazy imports throughout your code, it essentially ends up just creating all sorts of different chunks in a very dumb way. So you end up with like 30 different chunks, where it might have taken a single Imba function out in one chunk and spread them out, because that function is not used in these 3 files but used in all the others and stuff. With Vite and rollup, the way they do the chunking, you can easily specify that all of the things that are vendor libraries, let's say, should be tend to be like encapsulated in a single external chunk, so that if you rely on a few different libraries and the libraries do not change, but your code changes, then you will still get like hashed cacheable chunks for all of these things, which is much more difficult now with ESBuild. So
yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, so that's what I have right now for Vite, but I'm still actively working on it, and I'm looking for people to test it out and report if something is missing, if a plugin that you used to have for React, for example, or something is needed here in Imba. And it's now very easy to contribute. So if you want to contribute to the Vite plugin, it's very straightforward. I can walk you through it. I myself have, it's very inspired from the Svelte plugin. So we have lots of references and plugins to copy from, and yeah, it's nice. That's one of the benefits.
does it support like hot reloading for styles?
Yeah, hot reloading, I don't think it's supported.
Okay, not for styles.
Live reloading is supported, but you lose state.
For styles as well.
For CSS, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you mean? Like, let me start.
Yeah, if you start and you just change some styles, then the output of the file, like the Imba file, should have the same hash theoretically. So in ESBuild now, it will not reload the page; it will only reload the styles. But it's probably going to take additional work here to make that happen. But that was a question. If you
is that what you asked? So if I change something, the inline styles, it's going to appear. It does. There's a.
But did it do that, or did it actually refresh the page?
No. Oh, it refreshed the page.
It refreshed the page.
So if I do count is 4, and I move this display none, now count is 0.
Okay.
So it's live.
So I think that's probably the next step, to find out how to interact with that.
Yep.
Yeah. Because that's the existing Imba server does not do that. Like it's auto reloads the actual styles, but if you do anything else, it will reload the HTML as well. And I think that's probably a relatively easy thing to add to the Vite plugin as well, because yeah, we can figure it out. I think that's
definitely. So I think I'd like to hear like what other people think and what they want to talk about. So the things that we have in our schedule is talking about Imba 2.0. You talk about it a little bit, Sindre, but let's like talk about it again. And people are asking about the future roadmap of Imba.
Yeah. Where should we start?
Yeah. So let me stop sharing my screen first. And yeah, let's hear people's questions. So do you have any questions, anything you want to add, just want to say hi?
No.
You can say hi, Sindre.
Hi.
Hi, Lars. We don't hear you very well.
Sorry, now you must be hearing me better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Just a question about the documentation. Is the documentation already in a more or less finished state, or is there expectation of revamping or switching the different chapters around?
Yes, definitely. I think Matthias started working on that a long time ago, and then I think he had to move on to other Scrimba related things. Definitely, I don't think that should hold us back from, at least not hold us back from beta, but maybe even not hold us that much back from 2.0, because it is way overdue, and it is much easier to, the more adoption and activity we get, the easier it will be to update the documentation. But I don't have much time to allocate to improving the documentation now, but I know that Matthias has some interested in doing that, and Nathan Trafnar from Discord is also working a bit on it, I think, and we are also very open for contributions there, because the docs are still very lacking. I think they are, some of the sections are decent, but yeah, overall I think it's definitely in need of a lot of improvements and additions. So
what might be interesting is some easy to follow entry points for people that develop mostly in some other languages, and then they are looking for a quick hack on the front end side, and they should be being won over for Imba because of the nice features of the language, but they still require a quick guide to follow through. So just write these couple of codes, you will generate this JavaScript, and the JavaScript you included then as the front end, just replacing whatever existing front end you have. So it's just 3 or 4 instructions, not more complex than that, but it shows people that were not in touch with Imba beforehand that it doesn't take that much to just start coding and seeing something already happening on their end. Right now, it's a little bit more the expectation of reading every single page in the Imba documentation before you can actually start being prolific with it, and that you start understanding the whole environment.
Yeah, it's true. Do you have any input there, Abdullah?
Yeah, so I want to start. So when we publish the Vite plugin, I'm very interested in writing getting started guide, because it's going to be very easy. Install Vite, install this plugin, and you can start writing Imba. And even in existing projects, you can just add the Imba plugin and you can write Imba code. But yeah, that's definitely something on my plate, at least for Vite, how to get started, how to do this, how to do that. And yeah, I think especially for the Ruby community, they're going to be very interested in Imba, because Ruby is very similar to Imba, and Rails people, for example, they don't like JavaScript, so they're going to like Imba a lot.
Do you have any of you tried using Vite in combination with a different language on the back end, like Ruby, using a Vite plugin for Ruby? Or
yeah, lots of people do that. For Rails community, Laravel community, they usually use Vite.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because there's nothing stopping you from doing that, because it just so I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
To add a guide for each language, Laravel, Rails, Ruby, whatever.
Nice. Yeah. When is Imba to be released? So what was our goal, Abdallah? Was it maybe just closing our eyes and releasing it next week or something?
Yeah, so I think it's safe to have a beta for a week.
Yeah.
Then of the
we've had an alpha for 2 years, so I think 1 week for a beta should be okay.
Yeah, definitely. So at the end of the week, we just publish the 2.0, and and I think we can have a cadence that's more accelerated. Whenever ESBuild publishes a new version, we can increment to have 2.1 when ESBuild increase the version. So we're gonna have. I think it's nice to have that. People feel that the language is moving forward.
Yeah.
Would you then be able to consider something an agile approach where you regularly publish new versions, not waiting for some amazing new feature to be integrated, but just keeping a little bit with the flow with time?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, that's how it's been in the alpha version, and I don't see that changing later. So definitely, I think, since we're using Imba ourselves directly in all of our stuff, and until now, most of the features I've added to Imba has been explicitly to support some need, some urgent need I have in some production code. Then it is important. It has been important for me to very quickly push it into an actual release so that we can use the real Imba dependencies sort of in those projects. So, and that is still the goal. I think I'll probably still be working on some larger ideas and features on the side, but again, I think right now, for quite some time, the most important thing will probably be to improve the test suite, test the bundling, test more of the integration, like the whole flow between the server and the client, and entry points and workers and whatever, and the documentation and getting started stuff. And maybe most important of all is actually getting exposure somewhere, because as Abdallah said, and even if I find so many flaws in Imba today, I agree that it's more than good enough to be like something people should know about in these circles where they are interested in Svelte and Vite and Next.js and React and whatever is the next hot thing. I think we need to spend considerable amount of time actually trying to reach out, like get the Imba template part of the official list of Vite starter templates. Make people write some posts on Dev2, finally make it an officially supported language on GitHub. All of these things I think is important, more important than adding more features for the near term.
So Don asked about it in the chat. So about the GitHub, having the language support in GitHub.
Yes.
So what's blocking there?
No, I think it's actually, so it's popular enough now that it's no problem for GitHub to merge it. I think the problem now, like Mikey started fixing it up and added a pull request. We can link to that if I can find it. And I think what's blocking now is that it uses a relatively old TM language configuration for Imba, which has some regular expressions which are not compatible with PCRE regexes, which is essentially like one thing of the TM language config files back in the day was that they used a regular expression engine that supports back references and a few other advanced things that is not supported in JavaScript. And since GitHub needs to be able to highlight things quickly, I guess, all around the code base on GitHub. They have limitations on what types of regular expressions can be used in these language files. And I haven't had time to sit down and actually find the offending regular expressions and figure out how to work around it. But I don't think, so if anyone is up to that task, then I'd be extremely happy with that. It's not important for me that the syntax is perfect, like the highlighting is perfect. It's much more important to have it registered as an actual official language on GitHub. So maybe just even removing the offending regular expressions and then just living fine with the fact that a single keyword is not highlighted or something. That's perfectly fine, I think. So yeah, there are developments, but it's kind of stuck right now because there is a, yeah. I can link to the, I think
it should be somewhere in the community. So you guys talking about it. Oh,
yeah. Yeah, I have a few different links. I'm not certain which is the most recent relevant one. But yeah, we can, if someone is keen to try to fix that as well, they can also hook up with Mikey on Discord in the chat, and I guess he can, yeah, show you where things are standing. That's the thing. It's quite cumbersome to make the whole linguist package run and all the tests and whatever locally. I remember struggling with that myself, and Mikey also talked about it being a big hassle. So.
Just a question, maybe a strange idea. Has anybody considered putting all this into a Docker container? I mean, the Imba development toolchain or anything else. So it would be a kind of having a playground, but instead of using the official playground, just deploying a playground via Docker and just feeding it locally on the local machine would be interesting. It would also lower a little bit the entry level for newcomers.
For newcomers to contribute, or for newcomers to try out Imba?
Uh,
To experiment.
Yeah, maybe. I think probably, like, as long as things works nicely with NPM and VS Code, I guess that's good enough. I'm not sure like how many use Docker for those types of things, but I'm definitely open to it.
Well, the advantage of Docker is you no longer have this dependency nightmare, etc. So basically, when a new Docker image gets released by the official Imba gurus, you just know things will work no matter where you deploy the Docker image. And right now, what we see a little bit is, yeah, frustration on Windows with the window path, or on Unix, or God knows something is missing here, and there's some strange errors popping up, and it takes quite a while to fix them.
Yeah.
With a Docker container, you just have a uniform environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea.
There are, by the way, it's quite a few. We didn't mention that earlier, but recently there has also been quite a few big improvements to the tooling, I would say. So there is one version that I haven't published yet that I can publish now, which supports some of the recent changes with the bundler, like the way we actually import entry points. But overall, the completions should be better and more reliable. It should glitch much less, and extending classes like built-in classes and your own classes works much more consistently now, like actually where the typings are also extended and reflected in the completions and warnings throughout the code. So it is pretty nice with the whole go-to definition working for many more things than it did previously.
Yeah, I have a question I want to ask. So it's about reactivity features like Mobix-like things in Imba. So I think Ansari also asked about them. So what's the deal with them? Are they ready? Are they released? Are like
they're not documented, at least. They are. So I can say as much that when we if we think very long term about Imba 3 or whatever, like the next big feature in Imba, CSS, like inline styles and the whole styling language in Imba was not really supposed to be part of 2.0, but when I started working on it, it felt like a very good fit, and it became like part of the language. The next big thing like that is probably going to be syntax and specific things related to state and models and observability. Like the whole thing that you do with MobX state tree or similar things today, I think can be made much nicer if you actually think about it at a language level and allow yourself to even come up with new syntax to support it nicely. And we have been working on a streamlined data layer for Scrimba for a long time now, which is still pretty chaotic, but at least there are some concepts that are taking shape and working well. And at some point, like the next big thing I'm going to add to Imba is probably to take that whole idea and pull it deeper into the language. Part of the data layer, that's the reason I'm talking about this now. One of the early things I started looking at when I worked on the data layer was obviously key value observation, basic MobX functionality. And there are some limitations to how MobX works. It's pretty slow, especially in the way Imba would use things like it, where, yeah, I should probably not go into the whole rant now, but essentially Imba has a tiny implementation of the core things from MobX. Like you have these atoms, you have things that can be observable. You can report an atom to be changed, and you can report an atom that they call them in MobX to be observed. And there's a tiny library linking these things together. It's not documented. It's probably not going to be officially like a well-supported part of the first 2.0 release. Maybe that could be a goal to have it as 2.1. You can use it already, but I don't think it's ready for prime time like that. But it is being used heavily in this data layer that we're now doing on Scrimba. And yeah.
Yeah. So it's still early and it's in very active development.
Yeah, or at least like the core parts of it is pretty simple. So I don't think these core parts will change that much.
Can you show us a demo if it's easy to maybe in scrimba.com or something?
Maybe I can.
It's possible.
Let me see. So you can see my screen. Maybe do the example we were working on previously. What we think, like, let's say we have a class state and we have a counter 0, and this counter here. I'm going to do it in a separate file, like state Imba. I'm just going to export the do class state counter 0, title something, and then export default state. So can I just do it like this here? State. When I'm going to count here, I'm actually going to extend this state counter. So completions are not working here. I'm just going to see if it's related to any.
No, it's in the previous. Yeah.
This is going to be a very weird example, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Let me see. So main, I'm going to run the client here. So it's running here. So it at least the count thing is still working. So now we have, let's say we have this global state here with these properties. And maybe we want to do something special when some of these changes. So if you add observable, like the decorator observable to that property, it essentially creates a wrapper with a getter and a setter and an atom that you kind of can track if something in this changes. So if I use this here in the main app, let's say, so I do import state here, or just for fun to make it a bit more dynamic, inside of state, this state file here, I'm actually going to do const state, new state, export default state, and I'm going to extend tag element, get state, or get state. So if this worked here, then def something, yeah, I have access to the state from any tag in the application. I could also do it just as a global object, I guess. If I do, how should I show it? There is we have a few different decorators with this observability or reactivity part of Imba. So we have observable, which makes a property observable. We have computed, so we have computed get sum. That is, I guess, wrong, but counter, it's not sum. Yeah. And if I look here, see counter, count is, sum is state, sum, failed, import state. So I'm not going to import the state, I'm just going to use.
In the main file, you need to remove an import.
Well, actually, I'm going to import it because I have to import it at the top of the file, I guess. And I'm like this. Isn't this okay? So you'll see that this updates. This isn't magic at all because that's how Imba works anyways. Like every time it renders, it will actually execute that and call the getter. So usually if we didn't make this computed and I console log out getting sum, you would see that in the console here, every time the page is rendering from root, basically, it will call getting sum. So that would happen even if we just, if there's any event that is handled, so click log something, when I click on this logo here, when I click on the text, yeah, because it's not doing anything. Yeah, I can just call commit, can I not? Yeah. So now it's because this decorator here, this event modifier is not really, it's pure. So unless there's something happening in the event handler, it won't call Imba commit, but usually it would do. But now we're just hacking it together and forcing it to actually call Imba commit from root when I click this logo. And you will see that every time I do this, it will render the application from the base. It will go into the counter, and when it goes into counter and it renders this text, it will actually execute this getter every time you render, right? So that's one of the reasons you don't want to have expensive computed properties inside of render. So that's where computed comes in. So if I do computed here, this will essentially be cached until any of the things we reference inside of it has changed. So now you'll see that we call getting sum, but that does not happen again until we increment the count.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
In this concept, it doesn't really matter, but if this was a really complicated, expensive function where we may be filtering it from items or something, then it becomes important. Yeah. And it's also quite fun that, let's say we have observable title. And let's say we actually just bind that somewhere. So input bind state title. Title is state title. I'm just going to see if that works. So did it change at the bottom, right?
Yep.
There is another decorator that is called auto run, which is quite cool. So if I do auto run def update, it will essentially, this function here, as long as app is mounted, this function will be called whenever any of the observable things we refer to inside of update has changed. So let's say if I do if state title starts with update, then starting with Abdel. So you will see now, if you look at the console, maybe I should zoom in the console. Yeah, I can write, nothing seems to happen here. If I start writing Abdel, then it's actually, every time it changes now, it's going to log out this. And that's because whenever the title changes, it actually runs this function.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing with this is that this is also supported in MobX, obviously. That's like mobx.autorun, I think. And you supply a function, and that function will continue to run whenever any of the things you mention inside of functions change. The result of the MobX autorun will be an object that you can use to dispose this function when you no longer need it. But the cool thing about doing this in Imba, especially with tags, is that it's so easy to dispose them automatically when the tag is unmounted. So that's what's happening under the hood. So this is not being called until your app is mounted. And if it's unmounted, you don't need to care about like dereferencing and disposing these observable observer functions.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah,
you know, it's a lot of things packed. So it reminds me of using use effects in React, which is very annoying. You need to use dependencies and you need to have a callback, use callback. It's very annoying. But having that run automatically without thinking about it, it's amazing.
Yeah. And also, and it works like MobX. It actually, under the hood, it registers and deregisters different parts of different things. So let's say if I do console log update run update, you'll see that since state title is always referenced inside of this method, anytime title is changed, it will run update. And if I also reference somewhere like state counter, I mean, then it will also run whenever the counter changes. But let's say we do like if state counter equals 7, then we check for the title. That means that you will see that it's running when the count changes, but the count is still not 7. So if the title changes, it will not run. But if the count changes to 7, now we are like inside of the conditional tree where it also checks something on state title. And now we'll see that it runs update whenever the title changes as well. So it is actually using the same mechanism that MobX does, that whenever some of the dependencies changes, it sort of tracks the new things that the method now depends on and automatically dereferences from the other things.
Yeah, it's like Lawrence mentioned in the chat. It's like use effect, but it auto detects the dependencies and runs whenever one of them changes, which is very cool. So we can have that in like React versus Imba section in the website. You say use effect, this is the equivalent of it if you're migrating from React. So it's nice. It's nice to know.
By the way, also just as you saw earlier, I had this tiny bug where I tried to import the state, but I didn't remember that I had to like go out of this directory. in that case. So let's say inside of the counter here, span, we want to have an SVG and an SRC, which is assets logo.png. Is that it? No, icon. Icon.svg. Yeah. This button right here. So this sort of, especially when you have a rather big nesting in your project, which we do in Scrimba, where you end up having paths like this, then that obviously becomes quite bad. So now you can, with the config, I have a JS config here, it could be a TS config. If you just supply, as you would always do, a inside of paths, let's say we do just SVG like this, that should look in SRC assets like this, I think. And we may need to SVG. Yeah, we didn't need to reload. So now I can, from wherever in my project, I can actually just refer to SVG/icon SVG, and it will look it up through this. Let me see, counter. It should also have resolved. I think there's a slight issue with the TS, the TypeScript tooling, because it should also have resolved that path so that you can click on it and go to the SVG. But I'm not sure why that is not working right here on my machine now. And you can also, with the paths, you can also define multiple places. So let's say we have, at the top level here, we have icons. And let's say we add the same icon essentially, but we're going to call it something SVG. I haven't tested this, but I think SVG should be able to look in places like this. So I'm going to do, it's going to first look in SRC assets, and then it's going to look in icons. So if I instead here, in the counter here, if I go for something SVG, it actually works there as well. So it didn't exist in assets, but it does exist in the top level icons. And that's just, it's nice convenience, especially for assets.
Yeah, that's very cool. So we've got 5 minutes left. Are there any like questions, something we missed, something you want to talk about before we wrap up? So what did we? So I think we talked about the roadmap. We said that the Mobix things is going to be probably the next thing in Imba.
Yeah,
the next big thing.
Yeah, I think
Actually.
so.
Yeah, and so Imba 2.0 very soon. You can expect it, and
in September, definitely.
Yeah, definitely September.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
Yeah, I think there are some new people coming in from time to time, starting to use it actively. I still think it's obviously a very small community, but I hope with the addition of the Vite plugin and improved documentation and more exposure that we can start to grow it a bit more, like actually get people who use it in
maybe a good thing is to participate in conferences or podcasts.
Do any of you in the chat have any good ideas for that? Like what do you think we need to do to get Imba to the next level in terms of popularity and usage? There was, people can answer in the chat. There was one more thing I remember I wanted to discuss, and that is actually the whole debate with spaces versus tabs. And at some point, I just changed it for Imba 2.0 to only use tabs, because it was just, I'm of the opinion that tabs is superior because you can individually choose the indentation level in your editor. But I know that it is very, It's a big discussion. And I also know that most people are used to using 2 tabs, like 2 spaces, right? So even if you use tabs, you might want to use 2 spaces, have a tab width of 2 spaces. I am now considering to backtrack on this and actually allow both. It's going to complicate some of the things, especially with the tooling and the grammar. It's going to be a bit more challenging. But I think it's more important now to actually gain traction. And I guess I'm open to changing the official, like the allowing both tabs and spaces, and have the recommended way be 2 spaces. Do you have any input on that? Uloris's tab key is broken, so we'll probably.
Yeah, that's a good fix. So I don't mind really. So I don't think it's a showstopper, you know. So, but yeah, for some people it's important. So I respect that as well.
So yeah, that's another thing I'm considering. Anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about hydration SSR.
Yeah.
It's not a good question for wrapping up, but
I
is there in Svelte? I was porting their plugin and I saw that they have .hydrate method. So you can call it on a piece, I think, of string, and it does the hydration automatically, something like that. Maybe we could have that, and we can have, you know, SSR just like Svelte does it.
So we have, it's probably a good idea to, we have a hydrate function now already as part of a lifecycle stuff, but the thing we don't have is a consistent concept of how you actually bring data over from the server and how you kind of hydrate a nested set of elements or anything.
Is it a question of delimiters? Comments in the HTML?
No, it's just a question of how do you want to do the hydration. We can, if at least I have time, and we are recording this so people can just leave, but I can try to just, without having used it for a long time, try to actually show a server-side version here where we actually do these things. So if I do, maybe I should see serve. Server on root now? No. I'm actually going to add a server on root. Do index from now. Write a tiny server Imba serve. And let me see. I'm going to see if this works at all. Imba. Yeah. So now I have a server running. So now I can actually change things on the server. So let's say I hear, how should I do this? Maybe I can some code from that. So instead of including the index HTML, I can actually create a HTML thing here on Scrimba, and I'm going to import the src main Imba. I'm not going to import the index anymore. I'm just going to see if this works. Div, hello there. Yeah. So now you can see here that it actually, like, this is rendered. This element here is rendered from the server. We include the script here, and the app tag is not rendered on the server. Like, that's actually coming in from the client. But if we had, let's say we add a shared component here, like shared, we define a tag, hybrid counter self counter from server or client. We import this. You wouldn't do it in this way in a larger app. You would not have to include it many places, but import shared. I'm gonna import the shared here as well. Or I'm not gonna import it there yet. So in the server here, I'm actually going to include a, what did I call it? Hybrid counter. And you will see that it actually, just to make things easier here, I can remove some of this stuff here. So it's rendering the div, it's rendering a hybrid counter tag. This is rendered from the server. So as you can see here, if I add a button here, click, log, whatever, click me, it's here. But when I click it, nothing is happening. And this is the first challenge, that this is a problem I guess you probably stumbled onto on Scrimba, where we use hydration. It's kind of confusing to know whether or not the component is hydrated or not, or whether it is living on the client or not. But if I include this tag here, I include the file that actually includes this component. So import shared on the client as well. What's going to happen then is that inside of this client script, we actually include the definition of this hybrid counter web component. And once this hybrid counter web component actually appears on the page, whether it is from the client or from the server, it will be connected to as an instance of that class. So now you see that all of a sudden we did hydrate this component sort of. It was rendered from the server. So if I turn off JavaScript, it would still be here. But once the client is loaded, it's actually possible to click it. But the problem is, let's say we have some data and we, on the server here, we include data, a name, something. I use something for everything. I go to the hybrid counter. I can define the prop data, just, it's implicitly there, but just to see. Div my data equals JSON stringify data or whatever. You see that this is empty now on the client. If I did not include the counter in the client, it is still empty. And that is a bit weird. Now it's not empty. I'm not sure why that happened, but now it's it's still the tag that existed on the server. It has an SSR flag here that's automatically added, both so that you can style components that are not loaded, hydrated yet in a different way. But you also see that it has included this data in its rendering. The problem is that once you naively just awaken the hybrid counter on the client and render it, then it won't have a data property. So that's one of the initial problems, that we don't have a good way of defining how do you actually serialize data, both for a single component, but also in the larger things in your app, and then refer back to that when you dehydrate a component. But we also have, if I import it, now you see that the data is gone. We also have these hooks. So if I define def hydrate, hydrating, you'll see that it's calling hydrating, and that is being called before we render. So if I now log out inner HTML, you will see that it actually still included the data and everything from the client, from the server. But after hydrate is called and the first time render is called, it's actually going to replace everything inside of the tag with what's happening on the client. So you can use this now to hack around things, like you'd actually extract things from the HTML or from properties before you render. I think dehydrate, I don't remember if that's the Yeah, so you see on the server here that is actually calling dehydrating on the component on the server side. So if now I'm just going to live try to add this type of serialization. So I'm going to.
Can you add it as a property, JSON stringify an object and add it as a prop like data, SSR props?
Yeah, so now I'm going to do exactly that. So if your object is stringifiable, I'm actually going to do dataset dot data dot let's call it payload. I'm not sure. I'm just going to look for curiosity whether or not it is going to stringify directly. So if you look here now, it's not. So it added a payload property. This is being set from the server, but it's only being stringified to object. So let's say I do JSON stringify data. You'll see that it actually has that primitive data here. So now I could, inside of hydrate, I could actually do data equals JSON parse dataset payload. And now it will actually work. You see that we are on the client, it has reloaded, and it has actually brought over the data that was sent from the server. But in reality, things are much more complicated than this. Usually your data can't be serialized and deserialized in a plain manner like that, and you might be referencing data from all other parts of the application. So the challenge is to create a consistent interface and consistent concept for how to do that serialization and deserialization. That is also sort of part of the data layer that we're working on Scrimba, like having efficient protocols and ways to serialize and deserialize cyclic data structures that refer to each other in a clean manner.
I think we can just have a limitation for SSR stuff to not have something that's not serializable through JSON. Yeah. Because that's that's impossible anyway. If it's not going to pass through the wire. It's not serializable somehow.
Yeah, but you can use nicer for you can use something like message pack to allow people to define how automatically how you are going to actually serialize richer objects and how they're going to be deserialized and things like that. But
yeah, which is
and that's again if you want to try to solve the whole stack, which I tend to want to with Imba. It's better to have something that works obviously than a pipe dream of something that really solves it. But long term, my goal is to kind of remove all that sort of friction. But yeah, again, what I showed now is probably completely absent from all documentation. So I would love if someone is interested in trying to even just from this meeting, take the few things that you've learned from this meeting that would be valuable in the documentation, just add it to one of the markdown files in the docs and submit a pull request. That's a fantastic way to start contributing here. And bug me on Discord about how the rest of the hydration stuff works if you want to try to explain it in a written manner on the Imba page. Because I guess this is probably enough, these basic things there is probably enough to do something like what Svelte does with SSR.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm gonna take a shot for Vite SSR. And yeah, I'm gonna base it from this. You were saying?
No, I wasn't saying anything. For once.
Yeah, I think that was a nice community meeting plus an after party extension. Yeah, I hope you like it. Can we wrap up soon or?
Yeah, sure. We should try to keep this at a more regular time frame going forward. I think it was actually quite important having these meetings previously, and we just stopped doing them. So we'll try to do them every week, I guess.
I think it's every week is a bit too much. Maybe every 15 days. Yeah, every second week. I think it's good.
And it's probably often not going to be very well prepared like today, but at least we are going to talk about things and probably show things that you didn't know. So
yeah,
checking in.
Yeah, hopefully it's going to be better prepared.
Yeah, hopefully. Cool. Thanks everyone for actually joining. We'll try to get the recording out as well.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.